Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I wanted to talk on the breaking news about the assassination attempt on a Russian lieutenant general in Moscow. So without further ado, let's get into it. There was an assassination attempt on a Russian lieutenant general's life in Moscow today. General Vladimir Alexeyev was shot several times by an unidentified assailant who managed to escape after the shooting. He was attacked in the northwestern outskirts of Moscow in a residential building. The Russian general was rushed to a nearby hospital with what is believed to be severe injuries. However, the word coming out from the Kremlin is that he will survive and he is being treated for his injuries. Now, while no one has accepted responsibility for the assassination attempt on the general's life, rumors coming out of the Kremlin are that it was an attempt by the Ukrainian special services. We know that, if you look at the Ukrainian angle, we know that the Ukrainians as well as the Europeans are being pressurized by the American administration into a deal with the Russians. And we know that there are many benefactors of the Ukrainians as well as within the Ukrainian elite that are making a lot of money from this war. And the only people that are suffering on the Ukrainian side are the innocent Ukrainian civilians. Now, we know from a lot of the comments coming out from the United States that they seem to tend to be leaning more towards the Russian proposals and just getting a negotiated settlement sorted out. However, we know that there is severe pushback coming from the Ukrainian side as well as the Europeans. If you argue the Ukrainian angle, it makes sense. They've been bogged down in a war with the Russians. It's been going on for 4 years. The Americans, I think, are frankly tired of this. They don't have the finances to keep funding this indefinite war. Donald Trump has made it clear that he's pivoting back to his hemisphere and he wants to look after and secure his borders and the surrounding regions. Europe, for him, is not an issue. It's something the Europeans have to look after. So it makes sense that if these negotiations do not succeed, the war continues. However, what the Ukrainians and the Europeans need to understand is that in the last 4 years, whether they've made increments slowly or whether they've made them rapidly, the point is the Russians are making gains. Every day that goes by, the Russians are making gains. Not only that, the Russians are hammering the Ukrainian cities. Ukrainian civilians are suffering through a really harsh, brutal winter. These are scenarios that were postulated at the beginning of the Ukrainian war by the likes of Colonel Douglas MacGregor, Larry Johnson, John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs. They mentioned this at the beginning of the war, saying that Ukraine, once the infrastructure begins to get hit, the Ukrainian winter is going to really take its toll on the people. And I think for the Russians, the gloves have come off. The Russians view this as an existential threat to their sovereignty, and they've now decided that they're going to win the war in one of two ways. They'll either win it militarily or they'll get what they want by way of diplomacy. And to be frank, ever since this war has begun, we've always been fed the narrative that more money or the next tranche of funds is definitely going to secure it. It's going to help the Ukrainians. All it does is sustain a patient that is on life support. That is all it does. The doctors know that you've got all this breathing apparatus around you, keeping you alive, and that there is zero chance of you being able to regain your normal bodily functions without the aid of these machines. So basically, the machines are keeping you alive. That is the condition Ukraine is in at the moment. They're being kept alive by outside donors. The moment those funds and those weapons stop, that's it. Curtains close for Ukraine. And the sooner they get to the negotiating table, the better for them. You know, if you recall, it was first the next tranche of funds will help win or turn the tide for the Ukrainians. Then it was the HIMARS. Then it was the Patriot missiles. Before that, it was tanks. Then German tanks. Then F-16s. It just never ends. And not to mention, Volodymyr Zelensky seems to think that his God-given right is to stand and demand, and Europe will deliver. Delivering at the expense of European taxpayers. What is happening in Ukraine is cruel. It's a case of cruelty to humanity, because Zelensky is fully aware of the position that his country is in. He knows he's fighting a losing battle, yet he chooses to move on. That is tantamount to a war crime. Making his people suffer this way is not right. There's no moral justification for what he is doing. And walking around in military fatigue and going around the world begging for money, you're not doing anything. Half that money is being stolen. Half those weapons were stolen. There was a time when the Turks were supplying weapons to the Ukrainians. Those weapons were being stolen by people within the Ukrainian military, then sold at the arms bazaars in Kosovo, being bought by the PKK, who are fighting the Turks. So effectively, you had Turkish weapons being given to Ukraine, stolen, sold on the black market, bought by enemies of the Turks and used against the Turks. So you're effectively funding your own death. And that is what is going on. So it's like one big racket that everybody just wants to continue as long as they can line their pockets. All the while, the poor innocent people of Ukraine are suffering. And they're being fed a lie, and they're being told that this is what is happening. You need to support your country, and generations are being lost. So, my message to Zelensky would be, mate, get to the negotiating table, do a deal where you come out with something to show, because history is going to remember you as a butcher of your own people. So all this tit for tat, the Russians bombing your cities, you trying to take out their military personnel, they then inflicting harm on you. This is just a back and forth. All the while they're making advances. All the while you have to keep going onto the world stage and asking for money. And as the months and years go by, you're becoming more irrelevant. You are now old material. Iran is front and center. If you're not careful, the rate at which the Americans are moving, you will be dropped so far down the ladder that people won't even be bothered that this war with Ukraine is carrying on. So if I were you, I would go and do a deal, try and extract the best thing possible and make a formal apology to your public for what you have done to them, and then go into hiding somewhere and enjoy the money that you've amassed. You've got more than enough to last you and your family that are going to come after you a lifetime. So how much more you want, I don't know. But if I was you, go and do a deal now, my friend. So I want to thank you for taking your time to spend with us today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share and subscribe, as it helps our channel grow and it helps us with the algorithm.